So I was kind of alluding to this earlier when I mentioned that, like, I feel like in undergrad and just in general and in this whole pathway, thanks so much for coming. I'll see you later, man. I feel like there's a lot of kind of like unspoken wisdom, and there's a lot of like information that when I was going through it, no one ever told me. Like, neither of my parents went this route. I was kind of the first in my family to like pursue graduate, or I think my dad had a master's, but he didn't know anything about the US school system or anything. So here I'm just gonna kind of in 1 hour summarize every single aspect of an academic career path. I'll kind of mention where you can maybe fork off of this path depending on what you want to do. And throughout the whole lecture, just feel free to interject if you have any questions. Like, feel free to interrupt me. You too, Coral. I'm watching the chat, and you can just unmute if you want. You're the only one on Zoom other than me, so feel free to just chime in whenever. Cool. So let's do this. So here's a general outline of what I'm going to do. Let me hide my let's see, hide video panel. Let me hide my floating meeting controls. Okay, so hopefully Coral can still see. So here's an outline of today, and then at the bottom, I'm just going to kind of highlight where in the career path we're currently at. So I'm going to start with some disclaimers. Then I'm going to talk about some details about like pursuing a bachelor's degree, pursuing a master's degree, pursuing a PhD, a postdoc, a faculty position. I'm going to give kind of like some advice for each of these stages. The later stuff might not be super relevant to you yet, but just kind of, I want to expose you to it so that if you ever do pursue that, it'll at least be something you've seen before. This is being recorded and the slides are going to be shared to all of you. So like maybe even 5 years from now, you might pull these back up. So yeah, let's jump right in. So first, some disclaimers. This is a very general guide. I've drawn it linearly as if it's a path, but really there's no single path to an academic career. You heard from a lot of the panelists that they didn't really know what they wanted to do. I had no idea what I wanted to do. So there's no one size fits all path. It's just that if I went over every single possible trajectory, that would be way too much for 1 hours, like 1 hour. So it's going to be kind of like just a simple summary. And yeah, I also want to emphasize, these are my personal opinions. Always, whenever you get advice, think about what bias that person has. I'm biased. You're all biased. Everybody's biased. So, take everything I say with a huge grain of salt. Oh, that was good. Nice. So yeah, so what works for one person might not necessarily work for you. I think we heard that a lot in the panel, but yeah, so any of my advice, this might not be the best fit for you. So always take any advice that I give or anyone else gives and kind of like fit it into the context of your own life. And yeah, try to hopefully take some of this information that I go over and make your own path of whatever you think is right for you. Cool. Okay, so any questions before I jump in? All good? Okay, so first I'm going to give a very fast overview of a bachelor's degree. So yeah, so a bachelor's degree, what you're kind of doing is you're learning the fundamentals of a given discipline. So you're not really learning the bleeding edge of whatever your major is. You're kind of learning, here's the foundations. Some of the stuff might be like decades old. It might be even like centuries old if you're doing math and stuff. You're not learning the newest stuff. You're learning kind of the foundations at the bachelor's degree. Then at a master's degree, you've now finished kind of that foundational knowledge. And now you're learning some of the more advanced, some of the more bleeding edge modern topics of a given discipline. So like, okay, I have the ground, like the bases covered. Now here's some of the more advanced or modern stuff. In a PhD, you're not really learning topics. It's more so you're learning how to do research. So the research that you're doing, no one knows this stuff yet. You're going to become like the expert of a very, 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 very specific discipline. And you're going to be learning how to conduct research in that domain. So more so learning like a skill set or a way of thinking rather than learning a specific topic. And then after a PhD, there's what's called a postdoc. So Jens, who was on the call, he's currently a postdoc. And this is kind of a stage where you're after your PhD, but you're maybe before a faculty position. You're before like becoming a professor, and you're starting to lead your own reasonably independent research. You're still in a lab. You're still kind of, you have some mentor that you're working with, but they're a lot more hands-off. As a PhD student, you're getting a lot of like very direct mentorship. As a postdoc, they're kind of helping you navigate the world of like running a research program. And then when you're faculty, all the training wheels are off, like you're completely on your own. You are the person that's trying to figure out, what is the research direction? How do I set up my lab? How do I mentor other people? All that kind of stuff. Okay, any questions about like any of these higher level summaries? Okay. Cool. So yeah, so that's kind of everything. And if you want to become a faculty member, you might have to go through this whole trajectory. If you kind of switch off at any point, you can go into industry at any of these points. You can work in a lab at any of these points. So I'll kind of mention where the different branching off points are. But yeah, so while you're all in undergrad, what are some good things to do? I really want to emphasize it's good to try to do your best in your classes. I think when I was a freshman in undergrad, I really slacked off on some of those like first year classes. I was too busy like hanging out with my friends and stuff and not really wanting to go to class. And then when I got to the more advanced stuff, I realized that a lot of those intro classes that I wasn't really trying my best in, like those later stuff really depended heavily on foundational knowledge that I didn't really have. So I had to kind of relearn the basics. And even to this day, I still kind of struggle with some of the things that I never really learned properly. So it is good to, like, if you can, try your best in all of your classes. I know, folks might work. I had a job during undergrad, so I'll maybe shift some of the blame to that. But, all things considered, whatever you can do, try to do your best in those classes. Really take advantage of professors' office hours. UCSD classes are massive. I teach 400-person classes sometimes. And then how many people do you think maybe come to office hours regularly? If you had to guess, out of 400 people. Two? Actually, yeah, two. I had 2 people come to my office hours regularly last quarter. So, when you're sitting in this like sea of a million people in this lecture hall, the professor's not going to really be able to see who you are as a person. But then if you go to office hours, it's a great way of, first of all, standing out if you ever want a letter of recommendation in the future. But even, not in this I want something mindset, just to get mentorship and kind of talk to someone a little bit more experienced, it's a great way to get really good one-on-one time with the professor. So yeah, take advantage of those if you can. You're all already way ahead of the game on this. I didn't know about this when I was super early on in undergrad, but yeah, do research. During undergrad, it's really good to do research. A lot of the people on the panel, they mentioned it's also maybe good to try to do internships in the summer. So you can get a feel for like, do I want to go into academia? Do I want to go into industry? But during the academic year, you typically aren't juggling internships. So it's really good to do research, especially in the academic year. I say in parentheses or multiple labs because, so when I was an undergrad, my first research experience, we were doing, actually it was in the School of Pharmacy just across. We were doing like protein structure prediction, and I thought it was like a super cool idea. And then I tried it. I'm like, oh, I really hate this. This sucks. And then like my next research experience, I also thought was cool. And then I tried it. I was like, oh, dang, this sucks too. And the next one I tried, I was like, oh, I kind of like this, but the PI is kind of all over the place. This is not the best fit for me. And then like I tried multiple different topics until I finally found something that I actually liked. So, as I said before, negative information is super, super helpful information. So, getting an idea of what you like and what you don't like helps you kind of forge the right path for you. And yeah, research is a great way to do that. If you can, I never actually did this. I didn't do any internships during undergrad, and it's one thing that I really regret. I think I got super lucky that I happened to end up in the job that I wanted, but I think things could have gone really, really badly for me. I should have tried an internship just to get a feel for like, is this actually something I want to do, or is it not something I want to do? So if you have the opportunity, it's really good to try to get an internship somewhere just to see, do I like the 9-to-5 situation? Do I like working in this kind of corporate structure? Do I not like it? Each of them has their pros and cons. I mentioned do it especially in the summer because I think that's usually when companies are doing their internships. And again, just like with research labs, if you can do internships in multiple companies, maybe you can see, oh, I hated the situation in this company, but maybe I like this other structure. So like, just like with labs, big labs, it's a little bit more hands-off and more independent. Small labs, a little bit more intimate. With companies, different companies have different vibes as well. So like a big company, it's like very well structured and you kind of are a cog that fits into this big established system. So there's not a lot of room for flexibility, but it's not very open-ended. You're not really like figuring out stuff from scratch. You're kind of just, it's very like well supported. Versus at a smaller company, you might have more flexibility to do stuff. But on the other hand, you're kind of like thrown in the deep end and you're just kind of like trying to swim for yourself. So depending on your own personality, each of these have their own trade-offs. I think like if you can, trying internships at different companies might be good. Of course, you have, 4 years of undergrad, maybe 5 years or however long it takes. You don't have infinite time, so you might not be able to do all this, but just if the opportunity comes up, it's not the worst idea. Participate in workshops and mentorship programs. So stuff like this is a great opportunity. Not only are you getting info that a lot of other students don't get, but you're interfacing with professors and you're meeting cool mentors that, multiple years down the line, when you're trying to figure out the next step, you can always reach out to them and get advice and stuff. So, you're already ahead of the game, but yeah, keep doing this type of thing. And then if you haven't already, I think student organizations are also a great opportunity. It's great for learning, they hold workshops and stuff. It's great for networking. So, these are folks that they're going to end up going into companies, and then down the line, when you're looking for a job, sometimes, especially as you progress in your career, it's useful to know people. And it's just good for having fun. I don't know. Yeah. Any questions about any of these? Good. Cool. Okay. So how do you pursue undergrad research? Well, check if your university has formal undergraduate research programs, which UCSD does, which is why you're all here. So you've already kind of checked that box. Outside of this program, so I put a link to our own program just so that it's there, but there's other opportunities on campus as well. So in the other summers, if you want to try something else, or during the academic year, there's plenty of resources on campus. I can send these slides, by the way, so that you have these links. But yeah, so yeah, look into different formal undergraduate research programs. You can also check for research job postings on the university's job portal. So at UCSD, we have a couple different portals where professors can put research jobs that they're currently recruiting for. And then worst case scenario, even if you don't find something that you like in any of those, now that you've kind of gotten accustomed to what does research look like, you have a better idea of like what types of projects you're interested in. You can just straight up email professors directly and say like, hey, I did this previous thing. It was super cool. You're working on this thing. That's really exciting to me. Do you have any research opportunities? So you can always just cold email professors, and that's always a valid option. Depending on your situation, you can see, for compensation, you can try to get academic credit. So are all you UCSD students, or you're a UCSD student? You're not, so where are you two students at? Or are you three or?
I'm from California State University, Bakersfield.
Oh, nice. CSU Bakersfield. Okay, awesome.
I'm from Cal State Long Beach.
Long Beach, awesome.
I'm from UC Irvine.
UC Irvine, awesome.
I'm from Cypress College.
Cypress College, awesome. So I don't know about the CSUs in Cypress. I do know UC Irvine also has a similar system to this. And maybe the other institutions do as well, which is something that you could look into. But basically at UCSD, every department has this course number called like 199. That you do 1 quarter of research, or I guess for the CSUs, and I think yours is also semester system.
Yes.
Yeah, so for all those, like it may be semester versus quarter, but like for 1 unit of your academic year, you do research under a professor's mentorship, and then you get course credit under this like 199 number. And then for my department, computer science, this actually applies to the student's major. So they get technical elective credit. It helps progress them towards their graduation. So I usually have students start with that if they still have room for getting credit for that. Some professors might have research stipends that they could pay you. Some of these undergraduate fellowship things might have funding as well, or some other thing that you can get out of it. You can kind of talk to the professor and see like what might work out. Awesome. So then, okay, so any questions so far? All good so far. Cool. Okay, so there's one thing that, there's kind of like a fork in the road that you'll figure out once you get towards the end of undergrad. If you decide that you want to pursue higher education, which I want to emphasize, you don't necessarily have to. Like, I know a graduate degree is not for everybody, so like don't feel pressured to do it because you think it's like the right way. But if you've kind of like self-reflected and you decide, I do want to pursue some type of graduate education, you're going to run into this question of, should I apply for a master's or should I apply for a PhD? Which both of them you could apply for straight out of undergrad. So I kind of want to highlight the differences between these two types of degrees. So PhD is pretty much entirely research in a super specific topic or area. So a PhD program usually has some coursework, but it's usually secondary to any of the research that you do. It's usually just kind of like the icing on the cake that you do at the beginning, and then you focus really on research. So if you have a lot of relevant undergrad research experience in a specific area, it might make sense to just jump straight into a PhD if you're confident you want a research focused job in the future. So for my case, I knew, okay, after I did all that undergraduate research in bioinformatics, I knew I want to do something research related in bioinformatics. So I know I want to get a PhD. So I just applied straight in. If you don't have a lot of undergraduate research area and a lot of undergraduate research in that area, or if you're not quite sure what research area you want to specialize in, it might make sense to first do a master's degree. And then I think Celeste mentioned, there's a thesis-based master's you could do where you take fewer courses and then you do research to get a thesis out of it. That might be a good stepping stone to then kind of have one more step to figure out, what is the actual research area I want. A lot of PhD programs have rotations. I kind of briefly mentioned this earlier. So you don't necessarily have to know like 100%. I absolutely want to work on this thing. So for me, I went into my PhD program thinking I knew what I wanted to do and ended up completely switching. So, no worries, as long as you have a general idea of what type of thing you want to do. You don't necessarily need to do a master's first. It's also perfectly normal to get work experience in industry between undergrad and grad school. So some of the speakers talked about some of the trade-offs between that. One benefit of going straight from undergrad to a PhD or undergrad to a master's is that you've already been in like school mode for so long that it's easy to kind of continue going in school mode. Once you go into the workforce, you're very used to like, my job is a 9 to 5. I come home, I don't have homework, no one's bugging me. There's no tests and stuff, which is very nice and very easy to get used to. So sometimes it is a little bit challenging to kind of go into a job and then come back and go back into work, into school mode. But the benefit is you get a little bit more job experience. You get a little bit more kind of personal self-reflection and understanding like, what is it that I want to do with my life? You also get more money. So kind of nice to like come into grad school with a little bit more of like a foundation set up financially. So yeah, one thing I want to emphasize is PhD programs in STEM fields are typically paid. So you don't have to worry about saving up for a PhD. You should be able to just go straight into it. That being said, they don't pay very well. They pay like the basic amount to just have room and board and like food and stuff. So, one thing to consider. So yeah, so definitely get work experience if you want it, but like don't necessarily get work experience like to help prepare for grad school. It's not necessarily worth it if you know for sure you want to do a graduate degree. Questions? Oh yeah, maybe you first. Yeah, or yeah, you can go first. Sure.
Okay, I guess, do you have an opinion on like a 5-year master's type program?
Oh, great questions. Yeah, so 5 years master's. So and Celeste kind of briefly mentioned this as well. So just for folks that might not be familiar, some departments at some universities will have like a 5-year master's degree where you do your, or like they call it like 4+1. So like you do your bachelor's degree and then it's kind of an accelerated master's that you apply for towards the end of your bachelor's degree in the same department. Then if you get in, they kind of, in your last year of undergrad, they sprinkle a little bit of master's classes in the mix of it. And then you kind of transition to a master's program without having to separately stop your undergrad and then start a master's degree. So if you know for a fact you definitely want to get a master's, I think those are a great opportunity. They're usually cheaper because it's much shorter. You already have a lot of those connections. So if you end up wanting to do a thesis-based master's, you already might have done research with professors that you know. You already have your support system, you know the city, you know kind of everything. So I think if you definitely want a master's, I highly recommend doing the BSMS program at whatever institution you're at. I guess you're at UCSD, so I'm familiar with those. The only scenario where I would say maybe you wouldn't want to is, first of all, if you definitely don't want to get a master's degree, don't do a 4+1. Or if you know for a fact you absolutely want to do a PhD, then you might not need a master's degree first. So like I don't have a master's degree, I went straight from bachelor's to PhD. It won't ever hurt. So even if you know for a fact you want a PhD, you could still get a master's and then do a PhD. In which case I would recommend the 4+1 master's degree. But yeah, that would be one thing to consider. If you're absolutely like dead set, I definitely want a PhD, you could just try applying straight to PhD, or you could apply to both and then see what happens at the end. Awesome, yeah, great question. Yeah,
I just have a curiosity on the first bullet point.
Yeah.
So, it says PhD consists of like a research in a super specific area topic. So
Yeah.
like, would I be able to apply to another topic that is not my major? So like, for example, I'm a biology major, but in my home institution, I work in a chemistry lab. So when I apply to grad school, can I apply to chemistry instead of biology, or does it specifically have to be my major's topic?
whatever you want. Yeah, great question. So yeah, PhD is kind of like so actually so you touched on something else that I want to talk about as well, which is like, what programs do I apply? I think I might actually talk about this later, but maybe I'll click through it faster if I do end up going over it. So you absolutely could apply to a different department that's not the name of whatever major you were in undergrad. So I was bioengineering, bioinformatics. So I was like housed in the bioengineering department. And then for my PhD, I was in the bioinformatics and systems biology program, which ended up being in the same department, or kind of, but like my advisor was in the electrical engineering department. And then now as faculty, I'm in the computer science department. So they're completely like unrelated: bioengineering, electrical engineering, computer science. I don't know who the heck is calling me. I keep getting like 1-800 calls. So yeah, you absolutely could apply to like any program that you want. I think the one thing that you really want to make sure to keep in mind is, so with a bachelor's degree, you're kind of applying to the university for this major, and you can kind of, and my maybe like overly pessimistic view of undergrad is like, you are a customer and the university is a store, and they are selling you knowledge, and then you're paying them money to get knowledge, and then your diploma at the end is kind of a receipt saying like, yay, I learned this set of skills or something like that. So, but you are the customer, you're paying the university to buy knowledge. And then a master's is kind of like 2.0 of that. Again, you are the customer, you're paying the university money. They're giving you now more advanced knowledge, but you're still buying knowledge. And then your master's diploma is kind of, receipt, congrats, you learned this topic really advanced. A PhD is kind of the opposite. The roles have been reversed, where in a PhD, it's really the professors that are buying, like they're paying you as a PhD student to work on a research project. And yes, you're getting mentorship and you're kind of learning along the way, but like really the learning is kind of, you are doing the learning and like creating the knowledge. So a PhD, it's really focused on like whose lab you end up joining. It doesn't matter what university it's in, it doesn't matter what department it's in. With undergrad and masters, sometimes like people care about like, oh, Harvard or MIT or whatever. Like, doesn't matter at all for a PhD. For a PhD, the only thing that matters is who is the professor that you're doing research with, whatever department they might be. So when you apply for PhD programs, you're going to want to basically see like, who are the professors that do the type of research I want, whatever that might be. And then just apply for whatever programs they're affiliated with. Yeah, and then it might end up being completely tangential to like whatever your undergrad major was, but that's totally fine. Yeah, great question. Absolutely. Yeah, any other questions? That was great. Awesome. Cool. Okay. Oh, okay. So I might touch on that a little bit more later too when I get to the PhD section. So how do you pick what master's programs to apply to? So first, for a master's degree, if you end up wanting to go that route, you want to think, do I want to do a course-based master's or a thesis-based master's? So both are master's degrees, same recognition, but with a thesis base, you take fewer classes and then you do research, and then you get a thesis that kind of makes up for the classes that you didn't take. Versus a course base, you don't have to do any research, you just take a bunch of courses, and once you finish all those courses, boom, here's your degree. So yeah, course-based, take and pass a certain number of courses, versus thesis-based, take fewer courses, but then publish a thesis. If you want to do a PhD in the future, and the master's degree is really just kind of a stepping stone to figure out what types of research you want to do, you definitely want to do a thesis phase, because your whole next step is going to be a research focused degree. If you're doing it because you want to go into like management jobs, or like you just want a little bit more education in this topic, then you can kind of think which one might be more appropriate for you. But yeah, if you want to pursue a PhD, definitely thesis based. A non-trivial thing to worry about with master's degrees is consider like what funding mechanisms they might have. So at UCSD, if you're a master's student, you could TA for courses at the university, and then basically if you TA a certain number of hours a week, I think it's 20 hours a week, then they waive your tuition and you receive a stipend on top of it. So basically you don't pay tuition and you also get paid on top of just being there. So that's really nice. The downside is those are relatively rare because there's relatively like, even though there's a bunch of courses, there's way more master's students, and each course probably has like maybe 2 or 3 TAs. So they're great opportunities, but not everyone gets it. So that's one thing to kind of keep in mind. There might be fellowships, there might be financial aid, there might be, if you do a thesis based, your thesis advisor, like whoever you're doing research with, might be able to pay a stipend and like tuition and stuff. But you just kind of want to go into it knowing like what are the costs and what are the different funding mechanisms I can pursue. Make sure that you don't break the bank on this because master's degrees could be expensive. And then for thesis-based masters, similar to a PhD, as I mentioned, like look for programs that have professors that do the type of research that you want to do. It's not as critical with a master's because a master's thesis, it's not quite to the same level of research as a PhD. So you could end up just not really liking it that much, but just kind of knock it out and then you're done. Kind of like taking a class that you don't like. So it's not as important, but it would be good to consider. Yeah. Cool. Oh yeah, and then how do you figure out which programs those are? You could basically, as you're doing undergraduate research, you could see like, what are the papers that are relevant to the research that I'm doing? So like, what papers is my advisor making you read? Who is writing those papers? And then those might be good options for like whatever programs they're affiliated with, those might be programs you want to apply for. Cool. Another question? What's that noise? Okay, so how do you pick which PhD programs to apply to? So PhD, it's a lot more critical to think about what programs you want to apply to. For a master's degree, it's 2 years. You don't necessarily have to do research. So worst case scenario, it can, if all hell breaks loose, it can just kind of be like ripping off a Band-Aid. But a PhD is like a lengthy process. It's very open-ended. You really want to go into it kind of well planned. And for me, I didn't, and I got really, really lucky. Things could have ended up much worse for me. So I definitely want to emphasize like it's good to kind of think critically about what type of research area you want to pursue. Again, you want to find professors that publish high impact relevant papers in that area. I say high impact because you want to join a lab who they're kind of doing some of the more legitimate work in that field. I don't know if any of your professors have shown you, like there's a lot of research journals that are kind of like garbage journals that like, they're really just for-profit things that they don't really have any rigor. They just kind of accept anything, and as long as you pay, you get to publish in it. So professors that publish in those, you don't necessarily want to work with. You want to kind of work with people that can properly mentor you in doing good, kind of like legitimate research in that area. And then once you found these are the
I have a question really quick.
Yeah, sure. Sorry. Yeah, I couldn't see your hand. Let me yeah, go
I
for it.
didn't put my hand up. I'm sorry. What
You're good.
do you have examples of those journals that are like no goods?
Yeah, good question. I don't have off the top of my head. Usually they'll have like names that sound very similar to reputable journals. So there's one that's called like Science, Nature, and I forgot what the third word was, where it's kind of like a riff on a bunch of them. When you're in undergraduate research, definitely like talk to your advisor and they'll know some relevant journals. One kind of like a simple thing that I do that it's not necessarily the best thing, but journals have what are called impact factors associated with them. So if you Google like Nature impact factor, you're going to see Nature's impact factor is like 64 or something like that. Like most journals will highlight their impact factor, or it'll be somewhere else. Maybe if I go to their Wikipedia, 42, that's like an insanely high impact factor. The journal that I usually publish in is called Bioinformatics. Their impact factor is 7. So that's also very good. Usually you're looking for an impact factor of at least like 1, and that's very hand wavy. And this is not the best metric, but without any other knowledge, if their impact factor is at least like 1 or 2, they're usually decently reputable. That's not the only thing, but some of those like really, really sketchy ones that are just kind of scams won't even have impact factors. So, yeah, if you Google it and you see it has an impact factor of like 1 or 2, it's probably okay-ish. Hopefully. Big
Okay,
caveat.
so at least one.
I think at least 1. Yeah, some of them have like point something, which it's like, okay, that's kind of strange, but maybe.
And
But
nature
yeah,
has
at least-
47?
yeah, it's crazy. And it doesn't
Oh,
even,
wow.
it doesn't even scale linearly. Like 1 to 10 is like a massive jump. And then 10 to 40 is like insane. So yeah, nature's crazy. Which a lot of like the UCSD people like that are in the program that you're all doing research in, they do really crazy research. So yeah, you're in a good place. Yeah, I can't even publish in Nature. Yeah, great question. So I'll leave the meeting controls open, because I think that's why I couldn't see. Yeah, perfect. Okay, cool. Yeah, great question. Yeah, so one thing that I also want to emphasize with PhD programs is the master's, it's 2 years. You don't want to live somewhere crappy for 2 years, but worst case scenario, it's not the worst thing in the world. But like with a PhD, it could be even like 6 years, maybe even 7 years, depending on how your program goes. So when you find PhD programs you want to apply to, really think about like, can I live here for many years? So like for me, I grew up in Chula Vista. It's like 30 minutes south of here. I cannot live anywhere that there's any real elements. Like if it gets cold in the winter, I can't live there. Like snow, absolutely not. I cannot live in the snow. So like for me, that's a really big deal. For other people, maybe you want to live somewhere that like, I don't know, maybe has like a community that you can kind of recognize, or like, I know a lot of my friends that are, like international students from Asia, like they wanted to live somewhere that had like supermarkets that had the types of food and like groceries that they want, which it's like little things that you don't think about because we're talking about research, but you can't do successful research if you're not happy. And anything that makes you happy is something that's very important to take into account. So just make sure that you can actually live in the city that you're thinking about. So yeah, you'll be living there for 4+, typically 5+ years. So make sure that's somewhere that's going to make you happy. And yeah, master's, it's also important, but 2 years, not the end of the world, still not ideal, but it might be more tolerable. Cool. Okay, so and I want to make sure I get to everything. So what is the timeline for applying to graduate programs? This is something that I really want to put on everyone's radar, just because sometimes it kind of creeps up on you. So let's imagine, and these slides are a little bit out of date, so the years are off, but pretend whatever year it is that you're graduating. So if you're graduating in spring of 2021, for example, or in this case, like 2023, and you want to start grad school fall of that same year. So basically you want to start your graduate program fall of the year that you graduate in spring. You want to start preparing your application documents the previous summer, even though that seems way, 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 way in advance. So like basically if you're wanting to graduate like this upcoming spring, like spring 2024, and start a program in fall 2024, you want to start this summer preparing your application materials. And the reason for that is because the graduate school applications usually open in September of the year before. So like for like starting next fall, they're going to open this September. And you want to take your time to finalize those application documents. You want to have enough time to reach out to professors. I've had students that were really great students that I worked with and I really liked, ask me for a letter of recommendation like less than a week before the deadline. I'm like, I'm sorry, but like I want to write you a letter, but I'm like super busy this week and it's way too little time. So you want to reach out to your professors like months in advance so that they have time to actually write a good letter of recommendation. So usually, so let's say again, you're starting like next fall. The prior December is when those application materials are going to be due. And then between December and January, that's when they kind of review the applications and they send out interview invitations. Then January through February-ish, maybe into March, you're gonna be doing interviews. And then in like March or April, that's when they'll start sending out their acceptance decisions. And then you would accept their offer, and then in the fall you would start. So it seems simple, but like you really want to give yourself a bunch of cushion. You want to make sure to start no later than like summer, the year before the year that you want to start. Does that kind of make sense? Yeah. Yeah, go for it. Yeah.
Would this timeline also apply for MD PhD programs?
Oh, good question. I think it might be good to ask Sally. I can put you in touch with her. So as someone who applied for MD programs, didn't get anywhere. So that maybe my mishap is going to be helpful here. I remember, I think the med school applications open in like July.
Mhm.
So actually, it might be even earlier than that. You might have to, instead of the applications being, so I think most med school applications, they have what are called rolling admissions, where like the order that you submit them is the order that they'll review them. They'll kind of like review them and send interview invitations as they receive them. So with masters and PhD, as long as you submit by the deadline, you have equal kind of footing as anyone else that submitted. It doesn't matter if you were the day before the deadline or a month before the deadline. With MD though, I think some programs have rolling admission. So the earlier you submit, the better chance you have of getting in. And I think those might be in July. So you might want to even push this stuff like 6 months earlier, if that kind of makes sense. So I think you would want, if you're gonna,
Or
oh yeah, go first.
spring 2020 instead of summer?
Exactly. I think spring 2020. So yeah, if you want to start like next fall, you would start like 2 months ago,
Okay,
basically. Yeah. And then I think MD versus MD PhD, I think is the same application. I think what you'll usually do is on your MD application, they'll ask, are you also applying to an MD PhD? Like, are you applying to MD PhD? And then I think you have to apply for the PhD program separately or something like that. And then in your MD application, you would say like, oh, I also applied to this specific PhD program at your university or something like that.
Okay.
Yeah, feel free to email me after. I can look into it more. It's been a while since I went through that whole process, but I can either look up the information, or I can give you pointers, or I can kind of reach out to folks.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, that's awesome. You're gonna do a MD PhD, hopefully.
That's the plan.
Oh, good luck. That's exciting. Very
Thank you.
nice, very nice. Awesome. Yeah, great question. Cool. Okay, so any last questions about bachelor's? Kind of makes sense. Okay. And the later parts are going to be much faster. So I think we're still good on time. So now let's imagine you decided, I want to do a master's degree. Let's imagine you applied for master's, you started. Now, assuming you're in a master's degree right now, what are some good things to do during the master's degree? Again, it's good to try your best new classes. You know, these are like, now they're a little bit more kind of modern topics. So these might be a little bit more relevant to like, if you do a master's degree to go to a company, these are the topics that you're going to be kind of hired because you have. These are kind of like, oh, you have a master's in this topic, you can lead a project that's bleeding edge on this topic. So again, it's good to try your best in your classes. Again, take advantage of professors' office hours. I never had a graduate student come to my office hours, so definitely take advantage of those. If you end up doing undergrad to master's, and then in your master's, you know, consider doing research during your master's degree. If you're doing a thesis-based master's, you're going to be doing research for your thesis. Even if you're not doing a thesis-based master's, sometimes you could do like 1 quarter or like 1 semester of research, and then you'll get course credit towards your master's degree. So it's also something to consider. If possible, try to become a teaching assistant. As I mentioned, some master's programs will pay you and they'll pay your tuition for you. Some programs also let graduate students be instructors. So if you're maybe curious about teaching, that's a cool opportunity, and it's paid. So that's always nice. So many universities now have these teaching faculty positions that are kind of parallel to regular tenure track faculty. That's what I actually am. So I'm an associate teaching professor in the computer science department. So I do research, and I have all the same rights and all the same job security things as regular professors, but most professors, they do like almost entirely research, and then they do a bit of teaching. So I would say like 75% research, 25% teaching. I'm kind of the flip. I do like 75% teaching and like 25% research. So if you end up doing a TA-ship or you end up teaching a class and you say, oh, this is something I kind of like, that's also an option that has kind of similar job stability and kind of similar benefits as a regular professor job. And then, yeah, being a TA can really help you determine if these are the types of things that you want to do. Plus, the money is nice. As I mentioned, some programs will pay for your master's degree if you do this. Cool. And then, yeah, so some relevant questions that I kind of already answered. I already went over like what exactly is a PhD. I already kind of talked about how do you pick which PhD programs to apply to. So if you do a master's degree and then you're considering, do I want to do a PhD after this? Think about those same answers that I had for those other two questions. The same exact timeline holds. So applying for master's versus PhD, it's typically the same exact timeline. And then for MD, PhD, again, you're going to start a few months earlier than the regular PhD timeline. And yeah, that's the master's. Questions kind of make sense. Okay, and yeah, by the way, so if you end up doing a bachelor's and you decide, actually, I don't want any more schooling, that's totally fine. You can go into industry straight out of bachelor's. I have plenty of friends that are now making a lot more than I am because they've been at like Google or Microsoft and stuff for all the years that I've been doing my PhD and like faculty. So it's a very lucrative area, anything related to computing or like STEM in general. But then if you choose to keep going, master's is potentially the next step. And then you can either leave here and then go into industry. So Celeste has a master's degree and she's currently been at PlayStation for like quite a few years now. Or you can keep going to PhD. Or you can go straight from bachelor's to PhD. So yeah, now PhD, what exactly is this? So first of all, before even starting your PhD, what are some things you could do the summer before starting your PhD program? So let's say you went through that timeline. Come March, you got your acceptance notice. Yay, I'm going to this PhD program or this MD PhD program. What can you do that summer before starting the PhD? One of the most important things is just reviewing what are the requirements and timeline of that PhD program. So different programs have different requirements. They have different kind of exams or timelines. There's usually like one general structure, but each program has slightly different, like slight differences in kind of the specifics. So make sure you know like, what are the courses I'm supposed to take? When do people usually take these courses? Do I have rotations my first year? Blah, blah, blah. Just like learn. And usually that's on like their program website. Just figure out like what are all the different pieces of information? What are all the requirements throughout my PhD? So yeah, so even within the same discipline, different programs will have different expectations. So kind of good idea to get ahead on this and like figure out what exactly are those expectations. Another thing that's useful is in that summer, maybe read some relevant papers relevant to that type of research. So you're about to jump into a PhD program, you might join a lab, you might do rotations, but just kind of get an idea of like what is some of the research that's going on in this field. If your program has rotations, so I mentioned the program that I did my PhD in, they have a rotation system where your first year, you don't join a specific lab, you join the program and you do 3 rotations, 1 each quarter. And then afterwards you pick whichever lab you want to join. Hopefully if they take you as well. So, definitely look into possible first rotation advisors. Some PhD programs are not like that. Some of them are what's called direct admit, where acceptance into the program is acceptance into like this specific professor's lab. So in that case, you want to do that research well in advance, but assuming you have a rotation system, looking into advisors. Some programs also allow a summer rotation. So if you're like really, really unsure what you want to do, or you just have a bit of time, you might be able to reach out and see if you could do a rotation before your program starts. I know some people in DBMI did that in their PhD program, so it's an option. And the most important thing is maybe just ignore everything I just said and just relax and recharge. College is hard. I've been through it. It is time consuming. So, take some time to relax, go to Europe, go, I don't know, whatever it is that people do, just figure out, what do I want to do? This is going to be your last kind of no strings attached period for a while. So it's good to just, recharge, have fun. Cool. Any questions about any of that? That makes sense. Okay, so now the program starts. It's fall quarter. What is the timeline of your PhD? So usually in the first year of your PhD, you're going to mainly be taking courses. So each PhD program usually has some mix of courses that you take. As Jens mentioned, these are not really like, it's not like undergrad or a bachelor's where you're just taking courses because that's the degree. It's really like, hey, you're here because you want to do research, but we acknowledge that you might not have all the background that you want. So take some courses to supplement whatever skills you're missing. So if you like, for example, maybe you're primarily a biology major, but you want to do something more like computational. Maybe you would take some computer science classes as your major, as your like PhD program classes, so that you gain some of those skills that you think would benefit you. So it's really like pick courses focused on helping you with your research. And then you'll also like maybe jump onto some existing research projects. So for the classes, for the programs that have rotations, you'll start doing rotation projects, which is not really like, they're not throwing you in the deep end. They're usually taking a more senior student and kind of saying, oh, help this student with their project. You know, do like something short, just to kind of dip your toes in the water. So you'll start getting an idea of like what types of research you can do. And then your second year, usually you'll probably either have already finished courses or you'll start like finishing your courses that year. So I think in my case, I took 6 courses my first year and I took 2 courses my second year, and that was it. It was only 8 courses for my whole PhD. So you'll probably finish your courses, and then you'll also like, now that you've done a little bit of kind of rotation research and kind of smaller projects, now you'll start trying to figure out, what is my PhD research going to look like? Like, what is the project that I'm going to lead that's going to be kind of like my brainchild? And then usually at the end of your second year, you're going to have what's called the qualifying exam, or some programs call it a comprehensive exam. And this is just kind of like a general exam just to make sure like, you know what you're doing. You've spent 2 years in our program. Are you getting the hang of things, or do you need like basically this is more of like a filter to see like, are there any like red flags here? Like, are you absolutely lost, or are you kind of grasping things? So for the bioinformatics program at UCSD, it's an oral exam that you present, and there's you write a paper looking thing, and then you also do an oral presentation presenting the research that you did during your first 2 years. For some programs, it's like a straight up exam. So it's just like they examine you on a bunch of stuff related to your topic, but it's just kind of making sure like, you've been here for 2 years. Are you kind of getting the hang of things, or do you need, like, do we have to intervene to make sure things are going okay? So assuming you pass that, fingers crossed, then year 3, now you just continue your research. You haven't, you're not taking courses anymore. So you like really just focus on your research, and you start thinking, what is the structure of my dissertation going to look like? What are the projects that I'm going to work on that's going to kind of make the whole package of my PhD dissertation? And then at the end of your 3rd year, or maybe at the end of your 4th year, depending on how kind of quickly you progress, you'll take what's called the candidacy exam, or the Senate exam, some places call it. And really what this is doing is, it's called a PhD proposal. It's a dissertation proposal. You'll basically write a document saying, these are the projects that I've already done. These are the projects I plan to do in the near future. I think this is a PhD. And then you also get a committee. So you kind of pick your own committee. That's going to be your PhD committee. This is your PhD advisor, plus 4 other people that are somehow related to the research area that you're interested in. And you basically are figuring out like, okay, these are the people that are going to mentor me on my PhD. And then the candidacy exam is just, you present that proposal to that committee. So you've picked the committee. They've all agreed to be on your committee. You prepare with your advisor of like, here is what I propose my PhD is going to look like. You propose it, they ask questions, blah, blah, blah. And then if they say, yes, you passed, that means perfect. This is good for a PhD. Do exactly this, and we're going to give you a PhD. If they say no, then you kind of have to go back and revise the proposal and then try again. Usually your advisor doesn't let you get to this point if they think you're going to fail. So usually it's like just more of a formality of like, sure, you picked us and your advisor kind of looped us in, so go for it. But like usually your PI will prolong it until you're at a position where you're ready to pass it. So usually people don't have to worry about passing. It's just kind of getting to that stage. Does that kind of make sense? And then if you pass that exam, you become a PhD candidate. Now you're kind of in the stage where, okay, this is what my proposal is going to be, or this is what my dissertation is going to be. Just keep working on it. And then for the remainder of your PhD, you just keep working on research, you keep publishing papers. And then at the very end of it, you write your dissertation. And then at the very end of it, you're going to have a dissertation defense, which is like basically, hey, remember when I proposed all this stuff? I did it. Or if something didn't happen, then like, oh, I didn't do this thing, but I did this other thing instead. Look at all the cool science I did. Please give me a PhD. And then just like with the candidacy exam, usually your advisor isn't going to let you get to the stage if they think you're going to fail. So no one really fails these. It's really more of just a formality. I know some professors like making you scared or whatever, but like no. The only one to kind of keep an eye on is this second year thing. But that's more of like a good safety check for you. It's more just to make sure you're progressing. Okay, these two though, your advisor is not going to let you fail. They're going to basically make sure that you're ready when you go up for it. Any questions? All good. Okay. So let's imagine you did your PhD. You're like, oh, I like research. I want to continue doing that. And I want to be a professor myself. So again, one branching off point, a lot of people get a PhD and then go into industry. So a lot of companies have research and development teams that are all PhD folks. So like Celeste's team, I actually met a lot of their people at, and that's PlayStation. Like you don't associate PlayStation with like scholarly research, but like they do a lot of artificial intelligence research, a lot of like engineering research. How do I make these games faster, look better, more realistic, blah, blah. For bioinformatics, there's Illumina has a bunch of PhD researchers, Genentech, all these pharmaceutical companies. So a lot of people, they'll finish their PhD and be like, you know what, I want to make the big bucks in industry. Maybe I can make something that impacts real people's lives. So that's one kind of branching out point. But if you decide, I definitely want to be a professor. Oh, whoops, I still have more stuff. Whoops. Sorry. Rewind a bit. So how do you choose what lab you want to join for a PhD program? So people on the panel talked about this. You want to find labs whose research areas align with your interests. You want to consider, you know, do I want a big lab where maybe they publish better papers and like higher impact papers, but maybe I don't have as much time with the advisor? Or do I want a small lab where maybe it's not as established, so it might be a little bit more of a struggle, but my advisor is giving me a lot of one-on-one attention? Does the work style match your work style? Are you more hands-off? Is the lab hands-off? Is the lab very rigid? You know, do you just kind of like vibe with their work style? Do you think you can get along with the other people in the lab? So like, you know, if you've met the other people that are in the lab and you think like, oh, these people are super nice, I want to work with them, that's a good thing. If you meet them, you're like, oh, everyone's kind of a douchebag, like maybe stay away from that lab, right? If you don't vibe well with them, you're going to have a really bad time. So just kind of get an idea of like, well, I like working with these people. Does anyone in the lab have the technical expertise needed to mentor you? This is a really important one. Sometimes an advisor will bring on a PhD student to do some specific thing that they don't know how to do. That's kind of why you create a lab, is let me get researchers to kind of help make this vision a reality. But sometimes what you'll get is like a bio-heavy professor will bring on like a computer science student, but not have the technical skills to mentor them in the computational things that they're going to have them do, or like whatever domain that you're in. You want to make sure that someone in the lab has enough technical expertise in what you're going to be working on to be able to actually mentor you in that thing. And then is there room for you to do the types of technical work that you actually find interesting? So sometimes the professor has a very specific project in mind. Will you actually be able to do the cool stuff that you're interested in doing, or do you have to kind of settle for something that you don't want to actually do? Okay. How are we doing on time? Oh, 5 minutes. I'm gonna maybe click through these fast. So fellowships. So most STEM PhD programs, I think all really, they should be fully funded. You shouldn't have to pay any money of your own. But if you want to apply for external funding, there's these things called fellowships that are external funding sources that you could apply for directly. You basically submit a proposal saying, I want to do this type of research. And usually the fellowship application is for a specific type of research. If you end up getting that funding, financially, it doesn't really change things. Like instead of the professor paying for you, you pay for you, which, you know, whatever. So why do people do it? Well, one positive thing is if you're really interested in working with a specific professor, but they don't have any grants related to what you want to work on, this is a way of you joining a lab with no strings attached. Basically, hey, I have my own money, so you don't have to worry about using your grants that I don't want to work on. Let's work on this cool thing and I'll pay for myself. So it gives you a little bit more freedom. And then the other thing is it looks really good on your CV. So if you get a fellowship, that's kind of like, then when you apply for whatever comes next, those look really good. I didn't have any fellowships, so they're not necessary. But just to have it on your radar so that if you ever pursue a PhD, you can look out for those. There's a few PhD fellowship databases, but just, once you're at that stage in your life, just ask the professors and they'll know some stuff. Okay, so what can you do after finishing a PhD? You could either continue down the faculty route, so you can go into a postdoc. You could become a staff scientist at a university or at a research institute. So a lot of these bigger labs, they'll have the PI, and then they might have a bunch of like full-time staff scientists that their whole job is working on research in this lab. So that the nice thing about those positions is you get to do cool research, but you don't have to worry about like the administrative and like bureaucracy of like applying for grants and like making sure that all the paperwork is up to code for your lab. Like it's a lot more focused on just the actual science. You could become a lecturer at a university or a college. You could become a professor at a university. It's a little bit less common to become a professor straight out of your PhD, but it's not unheard of. That's what I did. You can become a research scientist at a company. So as I mentioned, companies all have research and development teams and a bunch more stuff. Cool. So like science communication, policy making, consulting, working for the government, blah, blah, blah. Let's say that you want to pursue a faculty position. You think I want to do a postdoc in between so I can learn a little bit more about running my own research. How do you seek postdoc positions? Usually like a year before you finish your PhD, you want to start doing some networking. So there's conferences in whatever domain that you're interested in. You don't have to know about those now. When you join a PhD program, your advisor is going to kind of show you the ropes. And like a year before you finish, you want to start networking at those conferences, at workshops, at seminars. You want to have people start getting to know about the cool stuff that you're doing. You also want to start thinking about like, what are the research questions you want to explore as a postdoc? So when you're a PhD student, the professor has done the big picture thinking. They hand you a project or like a general scope, and then you work only within that scope. But as a postdoc, you're kind of leading the way. So you have to think, what are the big picture questions I want to explore? Ideally, it shouldn't be perfectly identical to your PhD research. It should kind of be either an expansion of like, how do we broaden the scope of this? Or it should be like a continuation, like, oh, here's what my PhD research now enables us to do. You could try to get a postdoc fellowship if possible. There's graduate student fellowships, there's postdoc fellowships. And again, similar situation where like you come in with your own funding, so then you don't have to worry about like having a professor who can pay for your postdoc salary. Postdocs are more expensive, so this opens up quite a few more doors. So some labs that are recruiting postdocs will have funding, but yeah, having your own funding kind of makes that a little bit easier. And again, we're way ahead of the game for this. So just when you get to that stage, just ask your PhD advisor and they'll help you. Okay, I'm gonna go a little bit faster. Okay, so postdoc. So I mentioned postdoc is kind of the stepping stone after a PhD going towards faculty. How do you succeed? Get a bunch of mentors. Always ask them for advice. I think that's just generally good advice to have. There's a bunch of science meetings and conferences and stuff. You should just be attending these regularly. Just like a PhD student, but more importantly, as a postdoc, you want to present the work that you're doing so that other people kind of know who you are and know what you've been doing in the field. A postdoc is kind of a stepping stone for being a professor. So as a professor, you have to mentor a bunch of people, but we never get taught how do you mentor someone effectively, which is probably why a lot of professors suck at mentoring. So a postdoc, it's a great opportunity, like start practicing that mentorship stuff, like really, take some undergrads, take some students that you can mentor, practice teaching, practice communicating, practice managing, all that stuff. And then an important thing is find work-life balance. I think really all these stages, but especially in these later stages, it's important to find a good work-life balance. Okay, real quickly, and this is now way in the future, you don't have to worry about this too much, but okay, let's imagine you become a faculty member. How do you start a faculty position? You want to really self-reflect and think about like what kinds of impact you can make. So I like mentoring. I like having workshops and stuff, so that's why you'll find me at a lot of this type of thing. Other professors want to really focus on the research, maybe in a specific domain. So you want to think, what do I personally want to do? A faculty member wears a bunch of different hats. So sometimes you're a researcher, sometimes you're a teacher, sometimes you're a mentor, sometimes you're a manager, sometimes the UCSB bureaucracy people tell you to file all this paperwork, so you're basically an admin. You have to be comfortable jumping between these different roles. An important thing for faculty, but really any job in the future, is 24 hours in the day. Ideally, you sleep for 8 hours. What are you going to do with those finite 16 remaining hours? You really want to think about how you're going to use your time effectively. One thing that I'm still struggling with, but I'm trying to get better at, is learn how to say no to things. So when you're an undergrad, you're kind of in opportunity hungry mode, where like I feel like there's not as many opportunities as there are undergrads. So like when something comes up, you really want to take advantage of those opportunities. When you get to grad school, there's still a lot of opportunities and a lot of students, so it's not like you're getting bombarded as much, but now you're starting to get busier with other stuff. The further along in your career you get, people are going to be asking you to do more and more things, and you have a finite amount of time, so you don't have time to do everything. So it is important to like really make sure to start saying no to stuff once you start getting too busy. Even in undergrad, you might start facing that, where like if you take on too many different things, you might not be able to focus on your coursework, or you might what is that saying? Like it's better to full ass one thing than to half ass multiple things, right? So it's good to like focus and have the time to really do something good. It's easy to overcommit and spread yourself too thin. I'm assuming Celeste is on, so I'm sorry, I'll finish up ASAP. And then another thing that's really important, and I think this is good for as a faculty, but also as you're going through it, is find a bunch of mentors, both within your domain and outside your domain, and get advice from all sorts of people. As I started this, I'm biased, you're biased, everyone here is biased, the 3 other people on the call are biased. Everyone's biased. So it's good to have mentors with a wide range of backgrounds, experiences to be able to seek advice from.